All right, good morning, folks. We are joined once again by our friend Marco Witzer, who knows a hell of a lot more about cryptocurrencies than Doug or I. And we're here mostly to talk about cryptocurrencies. I'm sorry, central bank digital currencies today, something that's certainly is, if you know anything about them, are probably a little bit of a concern to you. And Marco's going to enlighten us as to what's really going on in that space. But first, Marco, since you are in Colombia, I got to ask, like, what's life like there today?
Well, it's pretty much the same. It has been over the past few months. Um, the one thing I can say that is a little bit different now is in malls and restaurants, you're supposed to still wear masks. And like a couple months ago, if you walk somewhere in without a mask, immediately any kind of low-level employee would think it's their task to remind you of that. And this has changed a little bit. I try this to walk basically everywhere without a mask now, and most of the time, people are not that keen anymore to remind you, and it goes mostly unnoticed. You still get reminded here and there, but the compliance, let's say, is slowly inching down, and certainly if you don't wear the masks, people are less inclined to bug you about it. So that's the one little change I noticed. Not much else, since everything else is pretty much normal already, or has been for a while now.
Hmm. All right. Well, that's good. I mean, because the compliance was pretty high last time I was there of masks, and um, it seemed like
It is still very high, but you're not being bugged as much anymore if you don't do it. I mean, as you know, legally there's like a $300 fine, the equivalent of like a monthly salary if you
yeah.
even in the street walk without a mask. But you see a lot of people walking around without masks now, and never anybody has said anything about this in the first place. I mean, it's not that these fines were ever issued.
Do you think people today are last when I last saw you in person was in December when I was visiting you down there? Are people more worried today about COVID than they were then, or is it about the same? What would you say?
I wouldn't be able to say because I really don't talk to a lot of people here.
One of the
I can.
elites. You don't
Yeah.
interact with the normal people.
I'm above that. No, but the only way I can tell is like going out day to day, like going to a restaurant, walking somewhere, that kind of stuff. Where I mean, if there's no threat and you have this inconvenience, it's only natural that over time the inconvenience slowly disappears, right?
Hmm.
So that's really the only thing I can say about this. I wouldn't know what people really think. I know a lot of people are keen on getting the vax. This is for me very concerning. But yeah, what can you expect in a country with an education level that low?
Hmm. Okay. I have more questions I could ask you about that, but since we're supposed to talk about central bank digital currencies, let's focus on that. Can you explain to people what exactly is a central bank digital currency and how it exists or how it compares to like cryptocurrencies, to Bitcoin
Yeah.
and things like that?
So a central bank digital currency, the concept is nothing new. It actually comes from the 80s. There was an American economist, James Tobin, that came up with this concept. Of course, in the 80s, this was something very ambitious because a central bank digital currency is basically, like the name implies, a digital currency you use with a digital device, and that is issued directly by the central bank. So it's a fiat currency on steroids, so to speak, basically circumventing the traditional fractional reserve banking system where the money gets created through the commercial banks, and just you have an account basically directly at the Fed, where they issue and control everything. So pretty much an Orwellian nightmare, but the idea has been out for a while. Nothing has been happening. I mean, if you look at the financial system in general, the automatic clearinghouse system is a system from the 60s. The international SWIFT system is a system from the 70s. So this is very stale, this whole system. And so why are these central bank digital currencies coming now? Well, very simple. Bitcoin and other cryptos are basically forcing the hand. So I think over the next 10 to 15 years, cash will mostly disappear in developed countries. I mean, already today in certain parts of Europe or China, like cash is mostly a thing of the past. I mean, there are certain supermarket chains in the Netherlands. You go in there, they don't even take cash anymore. There is no cash register. It's cards only. And yeah, Scandinavia is also very far advanced with that. China is very impressive because as little as like 7, 8 years ago, cash was still the main payment form, and now most places you can't pay cash anymore either. It's all QR codes and the apps, and plus now their central bank digital currency. So this whole space is now changing with these central bank digital currencies, and
One
of
of the
course
things that people say,
cryptocurrency.
people say, well, of course, we already have digital currencies because because it's all using credit and debit cards and stuff like that. But I think the key difference you mentioned there, I think is easy for people to overlook, is that there's a bypassing of the commercial bankers or commercial banks and the fractional reserve banking system. So essentially it's a direct relationship between central banks and consumers. Like that's something that's often overlooked. Don't you agree?
Yeah, well, that is certainly the key aspect, and it comes with a lot of other attributes or features that it enables that we should definitely talk about. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Talking about cash is in the low single digits, and like US cash is mostly used abroad, right? So it's all like credit cards already, and PayPal, Venmo, all these apps. So most of it is already digital, but now the whole digital structure, how we actually use it in digital form, is about to change significantly from both sides as cryptos evolve and gain adoption, and then on the counterbalance with the central bank digital currencies.
Okay, so how do they differ from the traditional or cryptocurrencies? They're not traditional, but like Bitcoin and things like that. Like, just how do they differ?
Well, number one, we talked about that right now in the banking system, it's all fragmented, right? You have all the different banks and credit unions, and basically money gets trickled out through that system. And the big difference with the central bank digital currency is all money, everything exists in one database, and that's the database of the government. So what you buy, where you buy it, who you buy it from, who you send money to, all of that is instantly known. So yeah, that also means like there's no more creative structuring to optimize your taxes. Like taxes can be debited directly from your account. So it's the all-seeing eye of the government. It's really a complete nightmare.
Hmm. You wrote an essay about this recently, which I'll encourage everyone to check out. I'll link to it in the description of this video, but you referred to it as the ultimate panopticon. What is that? What exactly does that mean?
Well, a panopticon is a prison design, basically, where the guard sees all the inmates and has a view over everybody, but he's shielded from view from the inmates, so the inmates don't know who is being watched. So we have with central bank digital currencies a digital panopticon where the government is simply watching everyone at any time.
But don't they do that now pretty much? I mean, do you feel like financial privacy is fundamentally a thing of the past already, right? Why is this so much worse?
To a large degree, not, because you still have the option of using cash. The system is fragmented not only in the banking system with all the different kinds of banks, but also in the different apps like PayPal. Then you have the credit card system. So it is very fragmented. And then plus you can have money outside of your local system. Like you could have a bank account in Singapore, and then the Fed or the US government doesn't know what is in that account and what this account is doing. So
technically, as a US citizen, you're required to report that every year, by the way. So if you have one of those, you should be reporting it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm using the US as an example, but of course we're talking about the globe, and the US is unique in the sense that you have to report everything globally with this FATCA system. But most of the other countries or regions around the world are not like that. And like I mentioned, even in the US, there's still a lot of fragmentation. So with each little extra layer of fragmentation, there comes a little extra layer of privacy. But yeah, it's all going down. It's all going away now with this new system that is being developed.
Where's it going to end, Marco? We can see where it's going. Where's it going to end?
Well, it's definitely going to end in a kind of war between the central bank digital currencies that, I mean, no reasonable person, we can talk a little bit more about all the stuff that comes with them, but no reasonable person should want to use them or should support such a system. And then on the other hand, we have, of course, cryptocurrencies that are also very rapidly developing. So they're becoming faster, the transactions confirm faster, they're becoming cheaper, and very importantly, they're becoming more private. And I mean, privacy is just like such a fundamental human right, right? It's even the base of other rights, like property rights. Even in the name private property, you have privacy in there. So it's so fundamental for human dignity. So we have this polarity, this duality, and cryptocurrencies are the free market are luckily developing much faster than of course what any government is doing. So there is this tug of war between the two systems, and it's of course my aim to wake up and educate as many people about this as possible. So there's definitely coming in the near future, some kind of war between these two systems. I mean, I personally believe that the decentralized future will definitely win, because you can only interfere with it and regulate it externally. These systems are completely censorship resistant and permissionless. In other words, anybody can use it and nobody can prevent you and me to transacting with each other. In the future, when all of this will be more private, even better. And short term, there will be a lot of problems, of course, and certainly in some regions where with strong governments, like in China, for example, it's looking rather bleak. But over the really long term, I think we're entering a period right now where things are going very dynamic in many ways, and we're seeing a lot of change in multiple ways. And so long term, I think we're moving to a more decentralized future. But over the short to medium term, it certainly isn't looking very pleasant.
Well, since it's well known that only criminals and miscreants and horrible people use cryptocurrencies, and they're going to compete against the central bank currencies, won't the governments really try to outlaw them and get control of your cell phone and your computer, which they're going to be able to do also? So what do we do about that?
Absolutely, they're going to try that. But like I said, the cryptos themselves, that system is immune to interference. So you can externally at the periphery, of course, regulate it. So whenever these two systems interfere, there you have like a leverage point as a government, right? So you can go after the exchanges. You can go after merchants that deal in high value items like properties, vehicles, stuff like that, where there are crypto transactions happening. So at these points you can interfere. But over the long term, I think just like in the Renaissance, when we had for the first time with the printing press a way to disseminate thought against the papacy, and it took some time, but then the thought permeated through society, and we had this in the end, as a result of that, the separation of state and church. Now we have entered a stage where in the past we had only government money. Now we have private money, and the private money itself cannot be interfered with. Of course, there will be this war, but I think a long-term consequence of this is the separation of state and money. Now, this is of course not something that's going to happen overnight. We're looking at like a war, quote unquote, of like 10, 20 years and over this time period where this will shake out. But I think long-term, there's no other way.
What do you think what are some of the characteristics of central bank digital currencies that we haven't talked about, that may not be intuitive to people to understand how?
Yeah, so we talked about how everything in terms of privacy, everything completely gone. And I mean, one aspect that people talk about is like, oh yeah, and money laundering and hiding from taxation and stuff. That is one aspect, but like you said already, like this is for the average person, let's say, if you're a big cartel, you can still do whatever you want. But for the average person, this has been history for a long time already. But you know, if you buy medication for a sensitive disease you might have, or any other kind of thing that you want to keep private, this is all completely gone. So the other thing we talked about briefly is taxation. You know, you with a central bank digital currency, you no longer need to fill out any forms or calculate anything. The government will just take its fair share, right? So taxation is another big topic. And then, of course, knowing everything you do, everything you buy, everybody you deal with, if you question the status quo, you will, of course, immediately become a dissident. And now many people will think, yeah, well, I'm not a dissident, you know, but just thinking differently, just like thinking scientifically, just thinking rationally is already a thing that is mostly no longer allowed in social media these days. So you will become a dissident by default if you have two brain cells. And then, of course, what can you do with a dissident? Well, you're no longer allowed to buy X. Oh, you don't support us, we just turn off your money. Like, you're completely at the mercy of this system. And so this is going down a very dark path. I mean, if imagine under communism in Russia such a system, or in Nazi Germany such a system, like this is like a authoritarian wet dream, right? And now people are mostly willingly going down this path, thinking this is a good thing, when quite the opposite is the case. So another aspect that comes with this, of course, and we're seeing this already in the existing system with like the stimulus checks and certain moratoriums on debt payments. So you can enter a whole new area of behavioral economics with this and say, okay, I give this demographic or this economic sector a stimulus or a bonus, and I can even tie it to, okay, you can only buy X with that, or you have to buy before a certain deadline before the money disappears. So you have these behavioral economics on steroids, which, I mean, the government interfering in a complex system like a free market at that level will guaranteed lead to disaster and crazy volatility. So every aspect, every additional feature, every additional power that the government gets with this spells disaster in my mind.
Well, I think that one of the things that I've thought about this is, like, I try and look at it from the perspective of, okay, you can assume that the government and the central banks are doing this because they want more authoritarian control. And then you do see this, actually, if you see that Jabba the Hutt guy from the Bank of International Settlements explaining this specifically, like, we can't control it when people use cash, but when, people use central bank digital currencies, we can decide, we know exactly what they're buying and when. And so this is so much better than cash. So that's the authoritarian side. But is there an argument that central bankers among themselves at least make, and maybe in good faith, and I mean, I hate, this is being generous, I understand, but in good faith on their part, are there additional tools that it gives them that they think could actually help them meet their monetary policy goals? Like, I mean, there is some justification they must have for doing this.
I don't think so at all, because if you look at just the central bank to central bank level, to have swap lines and stuff like that, that's already very simple and perfectly implemented in real time. So there's really no advantage on a central bank to central bank level. It all boils down on what you can do with the average person on the street and how you can direct their behavior and also limit the behavior.
But couldn't they argue that this is like, and again, I'm not on favor of this at all. I think this is awful, but I'm just trying to imagine from their perspective. I mean, it's very difficult for them to manage monetary policy, which they believe is their mission and that they actually can do successfully. Okay, so this is their assumptions. Through having use it, it's like almost like a ham-fisted approach, having to use these commercial banks to implement monetary policy, and use rates. It's just very difficult. But if they could instead say, hey, Marco, you got a lot of cash just sitting around, and we need to improve the economic activity in your area. So we're gonna put a negative interest rate on the money that's in just your account, you and people who have excess wealth by their terms, in order to encourage you to spend. And then people who aren't saving, we can offer a higher individualized interest rate for the people who aren't saving enough for their retirement by their method, right?
Well, excess wealth, that term should just send shivers down your spine,
Exactly. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying.
No, of course. I mean, I am sure that they believe that these tools are a blessing for them to direct and interfere at will, and which is exactly what they're going to do, and which is why this thing will end in disaster. Like, probably a lot of them have not, you can't even say good intentions, but really think that they can use these tools for their means to interfere, but it's not going to have any sort of not even close to any sort of positive consequences. It will be a complete nightmare for sure. And I mean, this complete insight into everything, this complete control over everything, and then to be able to, anybody you don't like, to just turn them off. Or also with the social credit system, like we're seeing an early implementation or push for an implementation with this right now with the vaccine passports. Like, you don't have that. You can't enter certain localities anymore. You're denied from travel. So this is already like access and movement control. And now you add a central bank digital currency on top, and then you have the financial control, and then you add a system that is already live in China where this is already implemented. It's absolutely horrific.
So what should we do, Marco? It's inevitable, it seems to me. So what should we do personally based on that?
Well, the only two things you can do is talk about it and educate people. I mean, in the bottom line with everything is it comes down to education. So the more people are educated about it, the better. And the more people refuse such a system, the better. And the crucial thing, the most importantly, we do have an alternative. We don't need to use that system. We can shift our assets more and more into the blockchain ecosystem and use the blockchain ecosystem and cryptocurrencies more and more as a counterweight. And the more people are educated about this and the more people are doing that, the more people can protect their assets from this, but also have opportunities to gain from as this new system in the blockchain ecosystem, as this whole thing grows and sucks up more assets, to make significant profits from this. So it can be a blessing if you're on the cutting edge of this and make use of the cryptos, the counterbalance that we have. But the bottom line is we have to get as many people to start using cryptos, and to get as many people get educated about this whole thing, and to even understand what all of this means.
My worry, my worry is that I think that people are so incredibly dependent upon the government right now for, for income in different ways. Doug and I the other day talked about, how food stamp increase, EBT, has gone up 25%, which is the largest single increase it's ever had. And that money is really critical to a certain portion. I think it's 42 million recipients get that. So that's one, there's all the Social Security recipients that get that. And I just think
15% of the population or something like that. Yeah, it's crazy.
So all you have to have is, as soon as you have, they switch to that method. Now we're going to give you money in that way. Because people are already dependent, it's almost inevitable that there's some adoption of it, when they do roll it out. And it makes me think they could really roll it out at any time.
Yeah, I mean, that's of course, again, by evil design and with evil intent, because if you have your own business or you go to work and you earn money from wherever, then you're in control, right? The government still might take and regulate, but once you become a serf by depending from the government for universal income like that, then you have a complete dependency. Then you're in total slave. That's a slavery system you're describing there.
Mm-hmm. I guess the biggest thing is if enough of people adopt it, it's almost impossible for it not to become widespread. If enough people adopt it, and if enough people are dependent, then they're almost certain to adopt it. So this is where Doug and I look at it and we go, well, it really seems like it's inevitable. It doesn't seem like it's something that,
yeah, I mean,
the financial crisis.
The only light I see there is what you have basically a free market, and especially in the crypto space. I mean, there used to be this a saying that 3 years in the real world is 1 year on the internet, with the tech boom. And in the blockchain ecosystem, this is maybe 3 months is 1 year in the real world. It's going even faster. So the free market is doing its thing and is developing, iterating, improving very rapidly. And then you, of course, compare it to a centralized structure that is always slow and vulnerable. And so the government is really slow in implementing this. I mean, we talked earlier about how the core banking systems are many decades old, and until their hand was basically forced to act, nothing really was happening. So they're playing catch up. Now, if we look at the biggest central banks in the world, there are over 50 central banks representing over 90% of all economic activity that are researching or already implementing central bank digital currencies. But of course, we only really have to look at the most important ones, which is the Fed, which is the European Central Bank, which is the Bank of Japan, and the People's Bank of China. These are the four big ones. And so by far the most advanced are the Chinese. They, in 2014, already started looking and researching this. And keep in mind, 2014, I mean, cryptos was a tiny space. The majority of people watching this right now probably were not even aware of cryptos, or certainly were not invested or involved in any way. But such a centralized control system like the Chinese one, the most dangerous thing for them is, of course, anything that threatens their social order. And so they were very early in recognizing the threat of decentralized currency. So 2014, they already started working on this. And now they're at the stage many years later, where that technology is slowly being rolled out. So this is now in a number of cities and in large events like the Beijing Olympics. They're doing that now. Last week or 2 weeks ago, it was integrated in the Beijing subway system. So it's a staged rollout, and I think over the next maybe 1 to 2 years, they will roll it out completely, and then it's integrated everywhere. And in China, it's you can have a bracelet, you can have like a card with a little display that looks like a credit card, you can have it on your phone. There's many form factors in which it comes, because think about it, you have to really cover everything if you want to roll it out completely and get rid of cash. So that doesn't happen overnight either. Never mind the development of years of development to get to this stage. And the Chinese are certainly much more able to develop something big and at that scale than the more democratic countries, although I'm hesitant to even call them democratic countries anymore, because they're really not, but they're even slower than that. So if we look at Europe and the US, they're years behind China. So the president of the German Bundesbank, which is the German central bank, in Europe, you still have the national banks that together form the Council of the European Central Bank. They said, okay, we're working on this now, but it won't be live until 2026. So if we take that at face value, which I don't really think they can do it much faster. I mean, some people are worried it's coming overnight. I think these timelines are fairly accurate based on where China is at. So until 2026, that's more than 4 years now. I think the blockchain ecosystem will make really yet another quantum leap and will be so far ahead. And hopefully, as we're hitting this inflection point in terms of adoption, where the mass adoption comes, where the curve goes almost vertical, hopefully by then we have many tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people using the blockchain ecosystem. And then we already have like a really heavy weight behind the decentralized alternative before they even start to really roll out the central bank digital currencies. So that's the only really positive thing in this whole development right now, in my opinion.
Of course, there are thousands of cryptocurrencies out there. I don't know how many thousands. So which ones should we buy? This puts people in your position way ahead of the game. You should be able to make many, many millions of dollars being in the right place. But frankly, most of us are still stuck in the Bitcoin age. So what should we do? Which ones should we buy now? And I realize that could change tomorrow morning, but what are you looking at? Which ones are you looking at?
Well, so Bitcoin was a very ambitious idea in the sense that this was the first time ever somebody conceived of such a system. And of course, they conceived it as peer-to-peer cash. So very ambitious, because if you look at what actually Bitcoin is today, it's very slow. A transaction takes up to 60 minutes to confirm. It's very expensive. You know, it costs a few dollars for a transaction. So and the capacity is also really low. So as a cash system, it's never going to work. You know, it's these parameters are more or less fixed. Maybe they change in a minor way, but this is what you have with what you have to work with Bitcoin. So that means Bitcoin can be an excellent store of value and a good transfer mechanism for big sums, but for day-to-day cash, impossible. So now we have to look at, okay, what do we need to see from the blockchain ecosystem that can become this cash? And so right now, we, as a means of accounting and also to exit the volatility in the crypto markets, what is being used are US dollar-backed stable coins. So we have basically a coin that is in the crypto ecosystem that you can move efficiently, fast and cheap around and completely outside of the banking system. But of course, it has this Achilles heel that it's still tied to the legacy banking system because it's backed by dollars. So in the end, it's backed by dollars sitting in a bank account somewhere. And so this is, of course, problematic because of that link, but also, 40% of all dollars have been printed last year, so you can hardly call this stable anymore. So it's increasingly volatile on the fiat side as well. So looking now into the future, what do we need? We need a crypto coin that is backed by assets that are natively within the blockchain ecosystem. And there is a vast pool of assets and a growing pool of assets. So this is becoming increasingly feasible. So we don't have this link to the legacy financial system. So it's self-contained within the blockchain ecosystem. So a crypto native coin that of stable value, that it still needs to float freely, but it needs to be relatively stable to be able to be used as cash. And then on top of that, it needs to run on these new or next generation blockchains that are fast, that confirm transactions within a second, that cost maybe a penny or a fraction of a penny to transact. And then, of course, the privacy aspect is very big, and this is still very much under development, but also very much coming. So if we put all of this together, I look a couple years in the future and I see a system that has all these properties, and then it's just a matter of adoption, which of course takes more years on top of that. But then we have an electronic private cash that anybody can send to anyone without anybody being able to control it, yet still everything on a ledger verifiable. And of course, without inflation. We haven't even in all this conversation talked about inflation. I mean, already inflation is happening in the fiat system through the legacy banking system. With the central bank digital currencies, I mean, it's literally pressing one button and you can inflate whatever, wherever. With the cryptos, there's usually a small inflation built in, which is what you want to have, because the global economy is, of course, growing a certain percentage every year. So you want to have a little bit of inflation to adjust for that. But we will have such a system in the crypto space that is perfectly suited for that in the not too distant future.
But what are some of the building blocks, the tokens that are building blocks for that are out there today that you have your eye on as somebody who monitors the space very closely?
Well, I have maybe 4 or 5 projects that I have high hopes for that hit all the right points of what I just talked about. I haven't really talked about this publicly yet because it needs further analysis, and I will of course publish this first in my newsletter, Project Serenity, that deals with these kinds of topics, and buy it first for the hedge fund, of course, as well. So it's I'm also hesitant in general to just throw names out there because you know, things can change. It's very early and very much under development, and then you give 2 names and people put their life savings in it. And in this space, you need to have a diversified portfolio to realize the gains and to also protect your downside by accounting for that not all projects are going to survive. So
well, this is one of the big advantages to subscribing to your newsletter, which I encourage everyone to do. And also, if you are an accredited investor, Marco has a fund. I'm not sure if you're still taking funds, but you have.
No, we still do, yeah.
Okay, so like something you might want to consider, somebody who has a broad view on the entire space. But like we hear about these tokens, so you know, Ethereum, and then and then we hear like is it Cardano is kind of like, well, maybe that's a better version of Ethereum, and then there's all these other things. And I guess it just, I mean, can you just talk about some of the major players that are now and how they work and what's good about them?
Ethereum is a good starting point because Ethereum had a lot of inflation and it was a big knock on Ethereum, but there was recently an upgrade called a London hard fork that has significantly reduced the inflation. So every time you do a transaction on a blockchain, you have to pay a fee either to the miners that process these transactions and secure the network, or in a system that's called proof of stake, where you just put your stake behind the validators, which gets slashed in case something goes wrong, where the system is protected that way. You have to pay a fee either to the miners or to these validators. And so these fees usually come from inflation. And Ethereum recently underwent a change where a big part of that fee now gets burned, meaning it's a disinflationary effect. You still have new token issuance, but given enough transaction volume, this can actually now oscillate towards a deflation if enough fees get burned to offset this inflation. So it's become much harder money in that sense. And if we compare Ethereum to Bitcoin, it has already much more capacity in terms of the volume it can handle compared to Bitcoin, and it is much faster and much cheaper. Still not ideal, still not at the level that we need for really cash for day-to-day transactions, buying a coffee, that kind of stuff, but already much better. And there's definitely a good argument to be made for Ethereum now, because it also hosts the whole decentralized finance ecosystem that is rebuilding in a decentralized permissionless manner all the different building blocks of the legacy financial system. It hosts all of that. This all exists on Ethereum, not on Bitcoin. So there's a good argument that can be made that Ethereum will overtake Bitcoin during the rest of this cycle and will become more important. It's certainly more usable as money. So this also is going into the right direction in becoming more usable.
So there are 2 different basic. This starts to get into a part of the conversation that for a lot of people who aren't as knowledgeable about this as you are, they're just like, it becomes confusing. But I think maybe there's two ways to think of it, is that there is the idea of a cryptocurrency that serves really actually as a currency, that really is like it's either like gold or it's like cash or something like that. But then there's also a lot of these tokens, these cryptocurrencies that are out there actually are more protocols, right? They're more actually, it's technology in a way rather than
Yes.
even attempting to be a currency, right?
Yeah, most people understand cryptocurrencies as, because the word cryptocurrency is already kind of problematic because of where we are at right now. They understand it as a currency. And yes, Bitcoin is trying to be a currency, and there are many currencies within the system. But of these 8,000 or however many tokens we have now, very few of them try to be a currency. Most of them are specialized protocols that do really specialized things. You know, maybe somebody's trying to develop a decentralized version of Twitter that cannot be censored. Maybe somebody is trying to develop a decentralized Dropbox or Google Drive where you can store your files in a secure, private, and decentralized manner. So there's all these applications, literally thousands of them, that try to do different things and improve on existing technology, and they all work because they have these tokens. And so that means you can speculate in them, because if such an application or use case works and becomes big and is designed the right way, the value of the token will also go up. But this token itself is not designed as a currency. So
Okay.
this is a very important distinction. We have, of course, on the other hand, also tokens that are designed as a currency, but this is really just a small subset of what we generally call cryptocurrencies.
So when Doug asked you the question about specific names, did you assume that he was talking about ones that would be for as a currency that could really offer that currency replacement?
Yes.
Okay, so are there names that are not maybe in the currency replacement side of things, but are just in the projects of interest that you find very fascinating, or that, you know, their technology is unique and different that you might want to mention?
So one good way to look at this is you have all the different applications and the specific protocols that try to do unique things, that try to improve specific functions in the economy, let's say. But below that, on a base layer, you have the general purpose blockchains that host a lot of these protocols and host a lot of these applications, and also host a lot of these assets that are built on top of it. So I can definitely give out one name that I consider is really to be a blue chip name, because it is one of these next generation blockchains that will host a lot of these things, or already is, but is obviously growing much more. And that is a blockchain called Avalanche. And so Avalanche, you can definitely buy Avalanche token, and just Avalanche. This is a safe bet to make, but it's still a cutting edge bet, because of the next generation blockchains. Its value is relatively small to what they're able to do. And so I'm not going to get into all the technical details now, because this will get then very difficult to understand for most people. But think of it as a network that will basically attract assets out of the legacy system, out of the offline world, and they will be represented as tokens on this blockchain, and a lot of other applications that you can use on this blockchain. So as this ecosystem grows, the AVAX token, that is the native token of the Avalanche blockchain, will grow significantly in value. And so, of course, when we look at this whole thing, there are many ways you can play that. You can go after the new currencies that we talked about earlier. You can go after the base layer blockchains. You can go after specialized protocols. You can invest in individual applications. So there are many ways to skin the cat, right? But as a one tip that is really like a high leverage move, but that is relatively safe, is something like Avalanche, that is one of these next generation blockchains that will suck up a lot of this stuff and will just grow tremendously over the next 10 to 15 years.
You know, it's so weird. I think that the it's such a complex ecosystem that we look at it, we want to understand it very simply, but it's almost like, you know, if you were to view it, look at the stock market and basically say, you know, in order to really make smart decisions in buying stocks, you need to know the companies, and each of those companies has all kinds of crazy internal dynamics, you know, and macro dynamics, you know, that are going to determine how it performs over time. And I think the same fundamentally is true with the different purposes that each of these cryptocurrencies serve.
Exactly. You can make kind of the equivalent of an index bet. Like if you basically buy either one of those three, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Avalanche, or any mix of them, that's kind of like a mini blue chip portfolio that could be seen like an index. So you get the bulk of the move of the overall ecosystem represented in that, maybe with a little bit of alpha by putting Avalanche in there. Or you can, what I do, really specialize in it and then go for the maximum leverage moves, where you can really outdo the performance of even that. And let's be clear, even just buying Bitcoin is probably the highest value move you can make with your money, because compared to all other asset classes, it's been the fastest growing asset class, cryptos, in the last 10 years. And we're only really now hitting this inflection point where the mass adoption comes. So I am very certain that over the next 10 to 15 years, it will keep being the best asset class to be in.
Interesting. So, but don't you think though that the attacks on, I mean, there's always been attacks on cryptocurrencies, you know, Bitcoin especially, but like they've really stepped up, it seems. And you know, obviously people, it's, you know, talked about China outlawing it several times, and they've outlawed it in different ways several times. But you know, even was it one of the representatives of the Fed yesterday, he said something like you know, 95% of cryptocurrencies are fraud or scams or Ponzi schemes or something like that. And
yeah, they have
some respond to that. I'm like,
what they're talking about, but
but they do, because they are in charge of the frauds and the Ponzi scheme, the ultimate one, which is
they're the ultimate
US dollar.
fraudsters. Yeah, they're trying to. Yeah, no, of course, and of course they're going to fight it. There's no doubt about it. But on the other hand, when Bitcoin was at 50 cents or $1 or $10 or $100, I heard the same arguments, and look where we are now. I've literally been hearing these arguments for 10 plus years. And I'm sure if you go back in history, when Gutenberg was there with his printing press disseminating his new ideas, that the papacy was said, we crush this guy, and we crush all this movement, and look where it led. So the cat is out of the bag, and people have to deal with it. And that's the beauty of these decentralized systems. Nobody can mess with them. Like, I can send money to you, you can send money to me, nobody can interfere with that. It's only at the periphery, and that's not enough to stop such a system. The future is going to be decentralized, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a straight line, because there will be this war, but it is going to happen, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. No matter if you're a central bank, no matter if you're the BIS, no matter if you're the president, it doesn't matter who you are, you cannot interfere with that system.
Well, it seems to have been true so far, and I certainly hope it continues. And I definitely, Doug and I have talked before about the idea that technology, while it is kind of the thing that's helping to create our panopticon environment right now, it is also the potential way out of it. You know, because as the tools, you know, as the cat gets out of the bag, basically, there becomes a tool set that's available to everybody. So,
I mean, talking about technology broadly or in general, it's completely neutral. It depends on how you apply it, right? Talking about decentralized technology specifically, it's very hard to I mean, it's permissionless and decentralized. So the whole control factor is being removed. That is really the paradigm shift here. So that's what makes it a force for good in the world. And then it's just a matter of like building the applications on top of it and getting people to use it.
So what do you think? Okay, so back to central bank digital currencies for a minute. What do you think is the major gating factor keeping the US from rolling it out within the next year? Like what do you think is?
They don't have the technology, you know. I mean, just like the crypto ecosystem that is developing very rapidly is not coming into existence overnight. Everything that we have there has been built over the last 10 plus years, and maybe they've been working on the central bank digital currencies for let's say they've been working on this for 2 years. That means they probably haven't written a single line of code. They have just analyzed and discussed in meetings, and but the actual implementation is still years away. So there's also actually a very important distinctions. In China, you have like this one database, everything directly at the People's Bank of China, like the full panopticon. In the US, they have been very clear that, and there you see very well the regulatory capture of Wall Street in the US. They said under no circumstances can the CBDC disrupt the commercial banking systems. It can only be complementary. So if we look at where's the development in the US, there is a service called FedNow. And FedNow, all that it is basically instant transfers from bank to bank. Now, if we look at Europe, and like Europe, there's nothing really high tech except for machine building and tooling happening in Europe anymore. It's completely ossified. Even in Europe, the equivalent is called the SEPA Instant Transfer Credit System. That has been live since 2018. So it's been going for 4 years. Not all banks are using it yet, but the majority. So in Europe, you have instant transfers for regular Joe Schmo from account to account. In the US, they are planning to roll this out in 2 years from now. So just for a real-time payment system from the existing banking system in existing bank accounts, just to implement one single feature, one basic elementary feature like that will take them 2 years. And then only after that, based on that system, they want to develop their CBDC. So you're looking many years on top of that to actually build that and then to roll it out additional years. So in a best case scenario, if you want to say, okay, they go really super quick, then maybe 2025. But before then, they simply don't have the capability to roll that out.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. But even by then, obviously, that's not that far in the future, and that will, and it's brings with it a lot of problems. But I also think that it seems to me there were two gating elements, maybe beyond what you've already mentioned, and one of them was that they have to have the wallet has to be biometrically. There has to be they have to know that it's you. Like they have to. It can't be something that is. If they don't know exactly who is the owner of the wallet, then it becomes something that they lose all their favorite tricks with it, essentially, So I thought that the rollout of the vaccine passport really is a great way to get them that, because you do have a verifiable digital identification for the first time really ever, that is an official one that is, that is supposed to be shared by the government. So that's one thing. And it seems like the vaccine passports really push that along to a great degree. And then the other thing really is just simply, I know that the banks obviously don't want them there. The banks don't want them there. But if there's a real financial crisis again, where there's a loss of faith in the currency, with all the money printing that's going on, then it would be probably, it may create the solution that you move to. You know what I mean? Like it could be the way that they present it as the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would make the argument that communism is an unnatural system and it has to fail, and that's why it has failed. And the same thing for a central bank digital currency that is, on a spectrum of centralized and decentralized, it's at this extreme, and it's completely unnatural, because if you look at the free market, it's like hundreds of millions of operators doing trillions of transactions. It's like an infinitely complex system, and to be handled by a completely centralized system, and then with the capable people in government in control of this, it will blow up spectacularly. I mean, the more centralized something is, the more vulnerable it becomes too. So I absolutely, like in a worst case scenario, let's say I am wrong and we lose the fight towards decentralization, not enough people adopt it, the technology is not there fast enough, and we move to such a nightmare scenario, then it will be really harsh times for a while until it completely blows up, just like communism completely blew up. So that is definitely another way out of this, because it's simply so unnatural, and it cannot work. It cannot work under no circumstances. Maybe it works for a few years, but that's it.
All right, Doug, what questions do you have for Marco about cryptocurrencies in general? Because I know they come up in our private conversations from time to time, and there's a lot of things I can't explain very well because I don't understand it, frankly, as well as Marco does.
No, it's absolutely fascinating listening to Marco go on about all of this, because it all hangs together logically. And as far as I understand the technology and the way things are evolving and so forth. So this is a really big deal. I'm trying to figure out, well, what question can I ask that would really be relevant? What am I missing, Marco? What questions should I be asking you?
But one thing we haven't talked about yet is the magnitude of the opportunity, because we talked about how the blockchain ecosystem has been the best performing asset class and will likely continue to be. But then, of course, within that, there are even bigger opportunities hiding. And if we look at a new form of money, let's say there is this new stablecoin, a crypto native stablecoin system that I described in its infancy right now. And let's say it has a market cap of like $200-300 million. If this really becomes a significant player, let alone the dominant player, what valuation will this have in the future? I mean, the amount of money you can make with this is mind-boggling. It's hard to comprehend. If you really get it right, it's crazy.
Can you give us some examples of where that's gone right? I mean, outside of the obvious ones with Bitcoin, I mean, because I think a lot of people are familiar with the non-big names.
I mean, I talked earlier about the next generation blockchain. So basically, when I started writing about the topic in late 2018, my focus was on, okay, there's Bitcoin and Ethereum, but it's all too limited, and they're all the new blockchains that will form the actual foundation of this technology. And so my focus was on the next generation blockchains. And so I've gotten that very right, and we're sitting on enormous gains there. Like one project we bought at less than 1 cent that went up to around $1. And I mean, it went down again, but I'm still holding it because it will go way beyond $1. So you'll have 100x right there, but which will probably turn to 1000x or more if you hold it long enough, which 99% of the people are not capable of doing, as we all know. But so that has been spectacularly right. Then the focus moved on the whole decentralized finance area, where we're like rebuilding all the different building blocks of the financial system now in a decentralized way. We've had some big winners there. And now I'm looking out, and saying, okay, over the next few years, like what will be a next hot area that would be good to get in now? And what I see is the whole currency space, where we absolutely have to move to a crypto native stable coin that is backed by crypto native assets, but still free floating, to have like what is basically money within this new system, within this new paradigm, and to build a basket of promising projects in that space, which I'm going to do over the next maybe 3 or 4 months. And to get even just one of them right will have a spectacular payoff.
I presume you're putting the theory into practice in your hedge fund. I mean,
Of course,
I guess
absolutely.
I should know because I'm a small investor in the hedge fund. I think I'm going to become a much larger investor at this point. One question I do have, though, is how does this relate to the price of gold or perhaps silver or other commodities? Any observations on that?
I mean, the precious metal space has been lagging badly. I mean, if we look at the last 10 years, basically it's been going more or less nowhere, which the longer this stays the case, the more explosive this will move, because it's not a winner takes all environment. Precious metals have, of course, still a very crucial role to play. And I think both gold and silver will go much higher. I mean, this is a coiled spring. So just because it didn't do much the last 10 years doesn't mean it will stay that way. Quite the opposite. If you look at financial markets and you see the longer something is below the mean, the more extreme the move to correct the mean reversal will or to have the mean reversal will be. So I personally own a lot of precious metals as well, and I think especially silver will do very well. So just because cryptos are really a paradigm shift and are becoming the main thing over the next like decades, really, doesn't mean that the precious metals no longer have a role to play.
Any particular observations based on that, on the stock market or the real estate market, or not?
Not really. I mean, other than I think that commodities in general will go much higher. I don't have any really thoughts beyond that.
Marco, a lot of times these conversations, people think of them as investment assets or speculative assets, and they like the utility aspect is often forgotten. So just to kind of bring this to the kind of the here and now, I wonder if you can maybe tell some of our viewers about some of the blockchain projects that are out there today that are basically that do offer an alternative to the censored internet that we now have. I mean, we know it's a big deal. Like, for example, the leader of the Taliban has a Twitter account, but Donald Trump doesn't. Like we have a very censored world, and that's only seems to be growing. But there are some protocols and tools that have developed that actually that enable people to get around that. And maybe by explaining a practical utility, it'll help people understand how important these projects are for the future.
Yeah, so outside of the whole monetary aspect, of course, censorship has become such a huge problem these days. You cannot say you cannot voice any rational thought anymore on Twitter, Facebook, or any of the major platforms. So that's, of course, a huge problem. And on the other hand, a huge opportunity for these decentralized systems. Now, if we look at in the past, how was this? We had like different smaller social networks, and then we had MySpace blow up overnight, and it hit kind of the sweet spot for a while, but then it was disintermediated completely in a really mind-blowingly fast way when Facebook came up, because they had the right mix of ingredients that was the right thing at the right time, and then Facebook blew up. And so with the decentralized technology, there still need to be like a few improvements, a few tweaks, and then people need to hit the right kind of right mix for this to really take off. Now, again, in my newsletter, I have one project in the portfolio, which I think will be the underlying protocol when it comes to decentralized social media. And we're sitting already on like 600-700% gains there, but I think it will go much, much higher, because it's really still in its complete infancy. So it's a matter of hitting the right mix of ingredients, and also in terms of the technology to get the right mix there. And then this whole decentralized social media thing will take off. So this is one big aspect when it comes to the censorship. But then also, if we look at the internet itself, the actual hardware and not the hardware, but the actual networking, the underlying networking that is moving all the data around, this is also becoming completely decentralized. There are a lot of decentralized networking protocols that will do things a lot better than TCP/IP. The actual protocol that runs the internet has a lot of flaws, because it was not designed for a lot of things that we're doing on the internet today. And so there are these decentralized networking protocols that are also still very immature, but all of this is coming to, you have to think about this blockchain ecosystem on a much bigger scale than just money, because really everything is becoming decentralized. All the data warehousing, the databases, all the applications, the underlying networking, the supply chains, the money, the financial system, decentralization is the overarching theme in all of that. And that's why it's such a big thing.
Right, I agree, and I think that's perfect, because the point that I've tried to make to people, and I was not able to articulate it as well as you just did, is that a lot of these, they require a lot of knowledge that you have, and a lot of people don't have it. But you have to understand, a lot of these tokens that you're buying, or it's almost like you're buying equity in a fundamental or IP in a fundamental technology that could be the basis of everything in the future, like TCP/IP is today. And essentially, no one earns any money off of TCP/IP. Like that was it's like this open protocol. But essentially, there's if these tokens essentially empower it, and so if you understand the technology, you're essentially investing in the technology. And it can
exactly. So one easy way to understand this for the average person is, if we go back to Facebook, you are providing as a user all the value with your data. Why is Facebook worth billions of dollars? Because your data is being sold to advertisers, and who owns or earns all that money? It's Facebook, or the shareholders of Facebook. Now, in this new decentralized world we've been talking about, this mechanism is still there in a way, but all the value trickles out to all the users, because there are no shareholders. There are the users that have the tokens, and the value accrues to the tokens. So you as a user get paid for using these services, or for providing your data. So there's like a paradigm shift on so many levels, because if we look at this whole aspect of it, we're also shifting away from corporations with shareholders, when we're shifting away to decentralized autonomous organizations that are completely like an ant colony. It really works like an ant colony, where people just come together and everybody is doing their thing and getting compensated, and it just works. It's really unbelievable. Like it's all of that is also very much still in its infancy with the tooling that you have, and what people are doing with it today. But it's also another segment that's growing rapidly, and where you see situations that really put this system to the test, where you think, okay, either this thing is crumbling now, or it's evolving and it's working. And everything we've seen so far, to me, somewhat surprisingly, because if you ask me, I would say, okay, in a business, you need a CEO on top that really directs the whole thing. But this ant colony framework is also working. It's really incredible. So we're moving to a decentralized space in so many areas. It's really amazing.
Interesting. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. I encourage everybody to go. There will be a link in the description for this video, but there will be a link to Marco's site. He's got a newsletter there. If you're an accredited investor, you can reach out to him and get more information about his fund if that sounds interesting to you. And this is the third time you've been on, Marco. So I appreciate you coming again, and I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point in the future.
And I buy the arguments that Marco makes, and I'm very happy he makes them, because it's a a relief for us and the listeners to have something other than unremitting bearishness the way things are evolving. So this is wonderful.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sooner or later, we'll get to the second renaissance. You know, that's my mission, to spread this meme, and the more people hear it, the more likely it will be that'll happen.
Awesome. I can't wait. Thanks. Appreciate it, Marco.
All right, cool.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marco.